Nah, I got something to prove and I ain't never gonna give up. Plenty of juice and I ain't never gonna waste it. Something to do and I ain't never wanna quit it. So come on, get a little bit, I know you wanna play with it.
Coming to you from Studio Iguana Monk down in the Big Dirty, it's the Twisted Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a working artist living in the real world. Please welcome your hosts, Larry Lines and Troy Winscott.
Hello, welcome to the Twisted Podcast. I'm Larry Lines.
I'm Troy Winscott.
And this is episode 5. And this week we are interviewing Aaron Trumm about music and poetry slam at Stanford and New Lungs. So this ought to be pretty exciting. Aaron is an interesting person, and it should be a good conversation. If that's pretty much the entire intro. So let's get right to it. And I hate art.
I hate art. Art is stupid. Art is boring. A-R-T-T art.
So some of the best printing places that I worked, like t-shirt shops, at the end of the day, you know, you'd fuck up like all day long. I mean, just all day long, nothing would go right. And then this production manager would go, at the end of the day, they're just fucking t-shirts. It doesn't fucking matter. And so based on that advice and the way we're our own worst critics, like all the time. And so that's kind of the liminal part of it, or the subliminal part of it, is that, you know, that we're our own worst critics. But then when you go to someone that you look towards as a mentor and ask them for that critique, it's always in a form of a fortune cookie. But they don't just like rip you apart like all the time, but it's almost in the form of a fortune cookie that you have to decipher like in the end. And I was wondering, because of your blog, and how you approached your blog when you were writing about a particular song or a particular memory that it reminded you of, and the way that you approach your critique on that, it started me thinking about what was your primary motivator, and what was your worst critique, or your best critique? Not worst, but like...
You mean of me, or...
No, someone else's critique that you got advice, the best critique that you got.
Oh, of the blog?
Of the blog, or like throughout your career.
Oh.
School, career. Because the way way you approach your critique of in your blog...
Positive.
Yeah, is being positive.
That's right.
As opposed to just something negative.
I just could, like, for one, the blog, I did the blog because I kept reading, I kept looking for new music, which to me got really hard in the mid-2000s. Like, finding new music became really hard because it was so easy for the recording industry to just keep classic rock, 90s and 80s music just spinning over and over again while they tried to figure out what the new digital model was. And they still haven't figured that crap out. Nobody's really got that figured out, except for iTunes. They make all the money. But I kept looking online for recommendations for indie music or any other type of music.
Sure.
And there was nothing that wasn't negative. It was all negative. There wasn't like anybody, nobody could like anything without being ironic. They couldn't go. You'd hear something like, that was good if you're in that type of mood. You know, that kind of shit. It was like, and then everything, and having made records, made music, been involved in long projects, everybody who's not involved in the project, they just love to rip it apart as if you had some intentional way of actually approaching the project, right? Like you spend 3 years on a Marvel movie, right? And they have all these people doing all this shit. And at the end of it, some people go and see it and they go, that sucks. I hate that. Like, I hate doing that, even. Like, I saw Rogue One, I didn't like it. And I was, but maybe my experience at the theater was probably worse than the movie. But it really wasn't a bad movie. I mean, they spent like 2 or 3 years on it, right? They spent a long-ass time on it.
Dude, see, that's the thing. It's like I hear people talking about how a movie is bad, and I'm like, you don't fucking know what bad is. You need to go to an indie film fest in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You will see there's a difference between what you think, you're just not satisfied, right? Or you're picking it apart. And I saw this one fucking thing where this dude just took a camera and he started just zooming into shit at downtown, literally like into the crack of a door, and then it would cut, and it was like fucking 10 minutes long, just zooming into the door. Like, there's zero fucking point to this. Like, and you can't and then you have to talk to him, right? And you're like, well, that was awesome, no bad.
That's funny because there's these movies that are resurfacing on the. What is that collection? Anyway, I can't remember, but it's on. Everybody talks about it all the time. Like where they get these classic movies, and it's got thousands of movies in it. And if you flip through some of these movies, and not just that, on Netflix and Amazon, there are new movies that are resurfacing that are like these 60s and 70s art house things, which are basically just somebody had film and a camera and some microphones, and they went to a party. And they focused on people, and it was like art, because that was really the sum total of it, is that you had a camera and you had film,
right?
And you ran it. Yeah. That's bad, right? But when you're talking about like thousands of people focused on a single goal, and you don't happen to like it, and you can talk about it for 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7 hours, and I do it too, right? Because that's part of it, right? That's part of the entertainment, is actually panning it or talking about it. But it's a long-running project, and it really just doesn't make that much sense to do it. And when you think about all of the indie music out there, and you can actually see when somebody's, not just music, but film, whatever it is, there are parts of things that can suck, and then you could just, okay, for instance, we've got, 4 or 5 of these interviews behind us. I've had the thought, oh, well, we should just throw away those first 4 interviews now that I know how to do it, right? And that's that's too much perfectionism, right? And so,
well, and you want people to watch you grow too. You don't want to suck so much that it's like they don't want to watch it or hear it, but you also want people to say, oh, look, it's getting really better. Like, you can see that with all your favorite shit. Like, I used to love Ask a Ninja. You should check this fucking thing out, askaninja.com. And this fucking ninja comes up. And then it was one of the first that had that sort of style where he would be, probably the guy just riffed on camera, and then they would cut it so you could see the jump cuts, but they would jump cut it so that it was kind of non sequitur and hilarious. But he would answer these questions, right? And you can see like the first few, they're fucking awesome. Like, artistically and comedically, they're great. But he's like, in this kind of bad lighting situation, which you don't even see. You don't go, oh, it's bad lighting. But then you go and look at the later ones after he got some sponsors and stuff, and you see, oh my God, the lighting's better, his costume is a little better, the sound's a little better. It just starts improving over time. But it's not so sucky to begin with that you can't watch it, but it's just you see him grow, and you go, oh, this is awesome. And then there's a point at which you go, oh, now he's too slick, and I don't want to watch it anymore.
Well, it's funny because there's a whole list of these things that that stopped like this. It didn't used to be the way it is now. Let's take filmmakers as an example. You have to put out a great movie like on the first thing you do, right? And it used to be that they would say, oh, you completed a movie. All right, let's do another one, and that third one is the one that everybody's looking for, right? And it used to be the same with records. They put Blue Oyster Cult on the road for 2 years, and they did a lot of crap. And the Scorpions' first album is called Virgin Killers.
Yeah.
And it is terrible. I mean, it is like, I mean, you listen to it start and you're like, that's bad. And you think you're going to be amused by this. You're like, I can't wait to, to show my friend that loves the Scorpions this fucking first album from the Scorpions. But then you're like, no one should listen to this. This is awful. And then I was listening to Zeppelin 3 the other day. And I was like, if this were their last album, would I think as highly of it as I do now? Mm-hmm. And it was like, no, I wouldn't. If that was the end of the road for them, it would be like this. They were okay.
Yeah.
But they went further than that. We just don't allow artists to develop much. And when I was writing that blog, that was part of it. Is that I was like, there's plenty of criticism. Why would I write about something I didn't like? Right. I mean, that's
fuck that.
And it's and I say this over and over again, but the risk is not in stuff that you hate. It's so easy to hate shit. Like, it's so easy just to go, oh, I don't like that.
Right.
You haven't said anything. All you've said is you don't like something. You haven't given anybody...
Yeah, and that's the lazy thing. That's the lazy thing. I think that's what the punk young people do, because they're too lazy and they're too scared to be vulnerable. You're not cool if you like something, right? And what I'm seeing, too, is that there's like... Oh, I can totally hear your echo now. It's awesome. I'm seeing a lot of like backlash, like you just said. Like, people are like, I don't want to be negative anymore. So like, when I joined that licensing course, it's like everybody just wants to be positive in the whole damn course. It's like 200 people going, I am sick of being hateful. And so the whole critique, there's a whole critique sort of formula that we use. I call it the sandwich formula, where you listen to a song and then you say something really good about it, and then you say some things that could improve, and then you say something really good again, and it's like a sandwich. And then if there's something that's just so bad that I can't think of anything to say, I just don't feed back. I just don't say anything.
Huh. I wonder how this is going at, like, we talk about this all the time, like art school, and I went to Berkeley, and people would by the time you're in your second year, people didn't mess around with the stuff that was positive. They would just go straight to, this is what could improve, and there's like, it's also sort of a less waste of time, right? You're not going, well, I really loved all this stuff about this is really good, but like that kind of thing. They sort of encouraged, if we're going to critique each other, that you just get right to the meat of what you think is wrong with it. We're all professionals and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But then what you're talking about is the same thing. Is there's just this. You can have a positive critique, right? That it actually tells you something that could improve about the song. But most of the criticism that I was finding in people just writing it online was just like, I'm sounding, I've got some witty stuff, and this is kind of ironic, and that kind of crap. And it would just end up panning everything. I could barely find somebody that said, I really liked this.
Yeah, and that, like, that's what I always noticed about Mitch Hedberg, is he wasn't that way. Like, I kept getting sick of comedy, because it was always mean. It was always like something, mean. And then Mitch Hedberg come along, and he's just like sweet, and he's fucking hilarious, right? But he doesn't say mean things at all, ever. He doesn't like pan anything. He just says stuff like, if I had a koala, I would feed it a leaf. And you're like, fuck!
So, the second part
Okay.
of the question,
Which is?
the best critique that you received,
Oh, that I've received.
that you carry kind of like your chalice into the future, right?
The best critique I ever received is one that I don't follow at all, which is because I was at Berkeley and I was in an ensemble, and there was a teacher that I really respected that was running the ensemble, and I really wanted to impress him, and my ensemble ratings were low. So I'm playing guitar, and it's a jazz thing, and he says, go home and learn this McCoy Tyner solo, no matter what instrument you're playing. If you're on the drums, interpret it for the drums. So it's piano, right, and it's a jazz solo. So I take this thing home. I don't do any other homework for a week, and I work on this McCoy Tyner solo, and then you're supposed to interpret it like so you're supposed to do what your interpretation of his, and then you're supposed to do something in the same space with your ensemble that is in the spirit of this McCoy Tyner, but your own voice. So we're playing through, and then the teacher goes, "All right, Larry, it's your turn," and I play through the part that's the McCoy Tyner interpretation, sort of a note for note kind of thing, and it gets to the part where I'm supposed to solo, and I play about maybe 8 to 10 measures in, and then he goes, wait, and he stops everybody, and he goes, "Larry, if you don't have anything to say, don't say it." And he counts us back in, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I was like, and I have never taken that advice.
I don't get. That's too esoteric, man. That's like, what? I'm playing.
It was esoteric or not. I mean, the message received.
Yeah, it's a good.
He fucking.
It's a good message.
And I'm not into esoteric shit at all, but.
Fuck.
So.
All right, ask me some questions. Let's fucking do an interview. We just got a lot of fucking stuff.
We are
we
doing
just did it.
Awesome.
I hate art,
Yeah.
and now it's over.
I hate art.
No, wait. What was for you? What was the big critique that you've received that helped or didn't help, or it just sticks out in your mind?
Well, I guess one, if we're talking about art, it was the last 2 weeks of art school. The one that I consider probably the most beneficial was the last 2 weeks. You gather together all your crap that you've done over the last years, and like you build some kind of portfolio to go down to this portfolio review to meet like all the corporate hoobly-hoo that are going to hire you, and it's a big hiring process showdown. And I just gathered together all this crap. I mean, some of it was good, but it was mostly crap, and I knew it was crap, and I just spread it out around the room and just went, "This is crap." And then I went into Richard Fleur. He was a mural artist here in the Montrose, and I asked him, "Hey, I have all this work that I've done for years, and it's all just crap, and now someone's supposed to give me a job." And he's like, "No one's supposed to give you a job, and you've done all this stuff." And I was like, "Yeah, it just seems like a waste to just wait 2 weeks just to go get a job." And he's like, "Yeah, that's right. Go get a job, because there's only 2 types of artists that you want to work with anyway. One is an artist with talent, and one is how cool you are to work with or work for. And one of those you don't need, talent. Go get a job." So I did.
And there you go.
Yeah. And just show up like a dumb dog.
All right, Aaron, since you're in the I hate art segment, tell us best, worst critique, most memorable.
Well, as you know, I was a poetry slam guy, right? So the best critique I could get was from the stage, from the scores, but the most interesting was when the first time I did a poem called Revolution, which was later one of my A-list poems, and it made the National Poetry Slam Anthology CD. I did it millions of times all over the world, and it always got nearly 30, which is a perfect score. The first time I did it in Seattle at the National Poetry Slam, it got, I think it was like a total of like 10 points or something. Like, it was so low. Like, one person gave it a 1.4.
And this is a poem that was like a staple for you after that?
Yeah, after that it became like this, one of the staples. Like, it gets requested. If I go to Houston right now into a poetry venue, I guarantee you someone will go, "I am the sky," which is the last line of the poem. Like, it was like the hit poem, right? But, what I learned from that is that, well, first of all, when you present something and it's your first time, you're super nervous, your being is not right, and it might not work. And that doesn't mean you throw something away. There is a point at which you have to recognize that you need to throw something away, but it may not be that first time you perform it or the first person that looks at it. And the same thing happened like with another poem, Say My People, which is like another staple that people in Houston would actually like recite back with me. That like when it matters where you are. It matters what the context is, right? So I did that poem in Chicago at a slam, and I got booed and hissed. Because in Chicago at the Green Mill, which is where Poetry Slam started, they want comedy. They don't want your fucking spiritual, heavy, Houston, dark energy. They don't like it. They want blue collar, they want comedy, and they fucking booed and hissed.
That's hilarious.
So,
wouldn't even have thought of that.
So what was the critique?
The critique is basically, fuck you, right? But the point is that it matters who you're talking to and when you're doing it and where you're doing it. The context is the critique, right?
We are recording. All right, we're here with Aaron Trumm, music producer, musician, poetry slam artist, poet, writer. Anything I'm leaving out?
Yeah, you're Larry Lines.
Oh, I'm Larry Lines.
I'm Troy Winscott.
There you go.
Hi, guys.
Hello. So we're going to jump right into it. We know Aaron pretty well, so it's hard to think that I have to interview him about the stuff some stories that I know, but it would be nice to put all this together. So I'm going to ask you early influences and how you got into music. Tell us that story. Childhood. We would all
well,
together,
my dad is a musician. He plays the guitar and sings. And so I grew up listening to all this country western swing. The old country, Loretta Lynn and stuff like some stuff that probably Johnny Cash grew up with, but I didn't realize this until later. So like, for example, I saw Johnny Cash playing the song Tennessee Stud the other day. And that's something that my dad used to play every day. And I'd requested, Tennessee Stud, he's long and lean, the color of the sun, and his eyes are green. So I grew up listening to that shit, my dad playing it. There's probably 1,000 songs that I cannot stand the actual artist who recorded it, but I like my dad's version.
Are those songs, are they sort of classic country and western that were not written by the artist who originally recorded them?
Probably depends. In a lot of cases, they were probably, tell you the truth, most songs that you know about were recorded by the original writer and then later recorded by somebody more famous, and that's the one you've heard, including I Love Rock and Roll, I just found out.
Oh, yeah.
So that's weird.
Who did that one first?
Well, you're going to have to look it up because I can't remember. But it was Joan Jett, the famous one, and the other one was a guy. It was a rock band, and it was a kind of punky band, and the song sounds exactly the same.
Oh, no kidding.
Except it's a dude. Yeah, it's weird.
Hmm.
So yeah, a lot of those old country songs were written, some of them were written by the artist and some not. There was a whole lot of Willie Nelson in there. And I heard a lot of Willie Nelson and Eagles growing up when we were kind of working on, my dad was in construction, so we worked on construction sites and we had Eagles and Willie Nelson all the time, is what I remember.
And how old were you with the stuff that you're talking about?
Oh, from when I was born till when I was like 14, so 10, 5, all of those ages I was listening to this stuff until I was I'd say about 13, maybe 12 or 13 when I got into hip hop because my aunt sent me a mixtape off of a record that all it said on it was just this black tape, and all it said was Street Beat. And I didn't know anything about who it was or anything, but it had Grandmaster Flash, Sugar Hill Gang, all of those people, like the original hip hop stuff. So I got into that, and then there was a breakdancing craze, and I got into breakdancing. So my whole sort of musical influence really is this fusion between hip hop and old school country. Like, it's
Did you
weird.
wear
And I
parachute
saw
pants?
what's really cool. I saw this play about Bob Wills, and I was like, Bob Wills is just like me, even though he's not musically at all, right? But his whole thing was he played the fiddle, and he was always bouncing back and forth between the white community and the black community. So he had this, what you don't recognize now, but it was this really weird fusion of those two communities in his music. And right now it sounds normal by now, but back then it was this revolutionary thing because he was into both cultures.
Huh.
Alan Merrill, 1975, played with the Arrows.
Alan Merrill. Oh yeah. See, now it's a podcast. You got somebody looking stuff up.
So I want to throw this in there because I always think of this in your career. But when did you get diagnosed with cystic fibrosis?
8 years old. Actually, I think they had a suspicion when I was 4, but I wasn't aware of that. But it was 8 years old. Before that, they thought I was gluten intolerant. So I remember when I was 8 years old, they handed me a cracker and said, "You should try eating this." And I cried.
Oh, because
That's
you
what I
had been
remember.
eating gluten for a while.
Yeah, because I thought I was allergic to it. So I was like, I can't eat this cracker. Actually, that's not the only thing I remember. But before that, the big memory that I have is being in Denver at the hospital. I was living in Taos, and nobody knew what the fuck was going on. So we ended up going to this specialist in Denver, and I remember being there in this hospital on Halloween. And I don't even know if it was nighttime or what. To me, it feels like it was like all day and all night, right? But I don't know. And so I had this orange jack-o'-lantern, the bucket, the plastic bucket that they give the kids, and I was going around to these rooms getting Snickers bars. And the other thing I remember is about that trip is that they stuck my finger, for a little blood test, and they said, "This isn't going to hurt at all." And then whack, and it hurt like fuck, right? So I never trusted doctors again. But other than that, I don't remember much about it.
Huh. So at 8 years old, you get diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. 13 years old, your aunt sends you this hip hop record, and you really get into hip hop at this point, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know that you did some recording in high school. Like your first recordings were like as soon as you got into hip hop. So this is really early equipment, right?
Yeah, really fast I got into I got into this breakdancing thing and hip hop, and then I started listening to, I don't know why, but I got this tape. I think I used to get tapes from Walmart or even before Walmart, like Kmart or something. You would just go in the tapes and you couldn't listen. It was tapes. And so you just pick something randomly. You just say, this might be cool. So I got Young MC, Stone Cold Rhymin', which is not a bad record. And he raps, and he does all this sort of triplet stuff, and he rolls his R's. So I memorized that whole record. I could rap that whole record along with him. And that's how I learned to rap. And then I just started, I had this toy keyboard, and I started making songs, and I did this one riff. Oh, I should show it to you, but I can't. But, I did this one riff, and I thought it was the coolest fucking thing ever. I figured that I was better than everyone. No one's thinking of this? That's what it was. And I was like, no one's thinking. So I'm the quintessential rapper because I thought I was the best fucking thing in the whole world. Like, I figured, you idiots, you don't even know how to do it. So here you go. Here's some. So I started doing that. What I would do, I did what's called pause loop tapes. And I thought this was an invention of mine, but it's something that a lot of people did. And it's similar to the whole concept of having the record scratch and the two turntables, except for people that didn't have turntables that came just a little bit later. Those were people from the 70s. I was an 80s kid. What we had is cassette tapes. And so what I would do is you'd take a dual well cassette player, which everybody had that. Not everybody. People in Africa didn't have it, but we did. And you'd take, some song. And what I did was the Young MC songs. And there'd always be like a beats intro, just drums. And so what you do is you play that back into the other tape while you're recording, and then you pause them both at the exact right point. Then you rewind the original one, you pause it exactly, and then you record again. and then you end up making this 3 minutes worth of beats. It's very painstaking, right? And it's you can't do it in real time like with a record player, but it's the same concept. It's just going back and repeating and cutting and pasting till you have a beat. And then I would go back, put the tape in the other thing, record over it with like some little cheesy keyboard. One time I was like hitting a can for another snare drum, and then I would go back with this shitty 70s mic that my dad had and record some raps. And then and again, another thing I thought that I had invented that no, everyone was doing this, was you would go, if you wanted like an echo, like a delay, you would go, my name is MC Murph, 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 and you would back up. It was fucking great. So I did millions of that shit, and then when I was like 17, I got for graduation, I got an actual MIDI keyboard, and then I got like a 4-track tape recorder for a Christmas present. So I just started down this road of being a studio guy, and I made a lot of stuff on that 4-track, and then I ended up in college, and the first thing I did was get into the sort of electronic music class, which was really a recording class, and from there we just went for it, man. And I ended up making my first record, MC Murph's Martyrs and Heroes.
So how old were you when you did that?
That was 19, so that's 23 years ago.
Do you have any of the stuff that you recorded before that?
Oh, no. But I tell you, there's one guy out there that does, and his name is Craig Stadler. And he used to do an internet radio show. I don't know what he's doing now, but we can track him down because he's a Facebook friend of mine. And he has some of the earliest demos that were before that CD. Like there was a song that I did that I heard it. He showed it to me, and it's super distorted and stupid, but it goes, fuck me up, come on, baby, fuck me up. That's the whole
if you're out there, Craig, come to ground.
Yeah, we need to hear you, Craig. And he was one of my original fans. He's a great guy. And that brings up another topic of sort of snottery, because I took that song, the lyrics of it, to a poetry class in college, and those idiots took it seriously. They were saying, they were like, and they're not idiots, but they were actually trying to be respectful. I can't imagine that they didn't know it was crap, but they were like, this makes a statement, man. I see what he's going for, man. It's a statement, and I'm like, I don't know if it's a statement.
Does any of this stuff, your early stuff, make you cringe?
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, what's funny, here's the funny part that I even have a song about it called Bring It Back, which is about going back and listening to your own stuff and getting inspired by your own shit, which may be a little egoistic, but it can work. And so, like with the first CD, I always thought it was the most terrible thing in the world. And then I would go and listen to it and think, well, not as bad as I thought. And that's something that Troy was saying earlier, that, we're our own worst critics. Is that, I really do cringe. I cringe at the last record. My last record that I released last year, I fucking hate it now. Because the stuff now is so much better, right? And there is a point at which, yeah, it sucks, but some of it, you got to realize that somebody might love it. And so don't just crumple it up and throw it away necessarily. At the same time, there's a balance between, you do have an image, and you do have, like, once you're in business, you have to think about your image and your brand, and does this fit my brand? And so the thing that makes me cringe the most about my older stuff is the anger and, which comes from having cystic fibrosis and having this subconscious thing of, fuck, I'm sick. I have to act like I'm better than everyone. I'm making up for something, which is another reason that I sort of identify with a lot of the rappers, or especially somebody like Eminem. For a while, I identified with him because here's a person who feels inferior. So you have to posture, right? And so all of my old shit is really, really postury. Even though I don't necessarily talk about drugs and gangs and shooting and my penis is bigger, there's a postury thing that really, really makes me cringe now. And I only got past that when I had the double lung transplant, which is 4 years ago, and actually started doing some growing. And really, I was working on it way before that. Actually, Larry sent me to you sent me to the BIT program. You sent me to all kinds of, growth work, that was designed to get me past the sort of machismo. And it's only now that I look at the work that I'm doing and go, oh, this is good. People can relate to this. This isn't angry. This isn't dark. This is cool.
That's interesting though, because like if you think about like a lot of the early work of a lot of people, like Eminem isn't doing anything great now. The last great stuff that he did was stuff that we would be talking about. I wonder if it makes him cringe. You know what I mean? Like he's older.
Yeah, that's would love to ask him, Eminem, if you ever hear this, let's talk.
Yeah, Eminem, come to ground.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could go through a lot of examples. There was the 70s and early 80s Rush, where Geddy Lee is just like, this is my voice, and you're just like, rah, right? He's like this really crazy, raw, angry, rebellious sound. And there are a lot of people like that. I mean, Iggy Pop isn't like, you know, doing angry, I'm crazy, young, and gonna die stuff anymore, right? I mean, it's you just you know, some of it's outgrowing things, but there's also that's the appeal. Like sometimes that's the appeal. Like when you're really hungry. Jay-Z's early stuff is even like this.
Yeah. Well, and it's the fire that, you know, the fear. I think the big fear for an artist like me is that as you get older, you'll start, and even Eminem says this. He says, you know, by 30, the fire's going to die, right? We're afraid that we're going to not have the fire and the passion once we get older. And I think, you know, a lot of people think that maybe that's because we're afraid we're slowing down, we're too old. I'm an interesting example because I got new lungs, so I'm not feeling old and slow, but there isn't the same kind of fire anymore. And it's because I don't give a shit about posturing anymore. I still have a little swagger, you know, and I'm still a little cocky, but I don't care about being angry, and there's so many things I don't care about, but you're not necessarily going to lose the fire and the passion. That if somebody young is listening and thinking, oh God, I got to do all of it right now because I'm going to lose my passion, that's crap. You're not going to lose your passion. You're going to die at some point, and then you'll be done.
Yeah, that's true. I just lost a thought on something there. Anyway.
Well, now that's a good segue about in your 20s.
That's true. All right. Yeah. So we're moving on. So you went to college. What did you go to college for?
Well, I started off as a computer science major. I'm not sure why. And then I was failing out, so I changed to being a composition major in the music department at University of New Mexico. And I realized that was just as mathematical, and the classes are also 9:30 a.m., just like in CS, so I kept missing them. So I was flunking out of that too. So then, and at the same time, I realized that history classes were really easy. So I became a history major and got a BA in history. And
but you didn't get a BA in history at that time, right? Because if I remember this right, it took you a while to finish that last year.
Well, I spent 6 years in college, and then I still wasn't done because I got 2 Ds because I kept falling asleep in the class, and I don't read. I learn orally. That's with the ear. So, and I don't, now I read more, but at the time I really didn't read. So, I flunked some classes. So it was, I don't know how many years later, a lot of years later, that I went back at University of Houston and finished those 2 classes and some CS classes so that I could apply to Stanford in the master's program. I would never have had, if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have bothered. I would never have bothered.
So from 19, you did your first record. It's like your first thing. What did you end up doing with that? Did you end up, did you promote it a lot? Did you know what you were doing? Did you learn anything from like after the business side of it?
Yes. Yes, and that's a good question because, you know, you can make a lot of mistakes, and the world is very different now too. So yeah, it actually, I did promote the shit out of it actually, and the way I did that, and this is how I met Craig Stadler, is I just started emailing, and at the time, this was the first days of the internet, so you could find people. It wasn't like it is now. It wasn't this bunch of noise. It was just you'd find people, you'd email them, and it was mostly actual college radio people. And then you'd make a little bit of a relationship. You'd say, can I send you a CD? And then I'd send them a CD. So I don't know how much it cost me. A lot. And I'd send them a CD. And then, you know, people would play it. And I actually, the record did pretty well as far as that is concerned. It had international airplay. It had, there was a radio station in Canada where it made its top 5 albums. I forget the name of the radio station. It got, and this may not sound like a big number, but it got $11 from BMI.
Oh man.
That's something, actually. It's but I never sold any, because at the time, first of all, I didn't know how you do this. I just sent records. I didn't know that there needed to be some place for somebody to buy it if they heard it on the radio, and I didn't know, to tell the radio stations to say the name of it or anything like that. And at the time, it didn't matter that I didn't know that, because there wasn't, distribution was still the old model. It was CDs, it was physical distributors, and you had to be somebody. You had to be basically a label. And at the time, the indie thing wasn't really a thing. It was starting to try to be a thing, but it wasn't. So I couldn't have had distribution of that record, but I didn't know that, so screw it. And so I did all this promoting, and I got a bunch of great reviews. I got one bad review. I only got one really bad review, but that's kind of because that was the first one I sent, and I sent a tape instead of a CD. I just sent this black and white homemade cover, and they panned me for that. They didn't really talk about the music. They just panned the homemade cover. So from then on, I sent the CDs. That's something you learn. That's the first time I learned that context is really decisive. So, which I even did a study on at Stanford, where, what you're seeing from packaging, what you know about the person, whether the person's famous, all of this stuff that's context, which I mentioned before in the I Hate Art section. Context is really decisive, and I studied this for a little bit and found out that, it actually changes what you hear. Not only what you think about what you hear, but what you hear is determined by the context. So, anybody listening out there, don't send a half-assed homemade tape unless you want somebody to feel like that's what they're listening to. And that might be useful, but think about what you're sending as far as packaging, what you're sending as far as websites and all that stuff. That's where I learned that you have to, kind of pay attention to the whole package rather than just, I'm a musician and I don't care if anything else sucks.
So what year was that?
That would be 1996.
Yeah, you remember the Moonshine label guys?
No, 94. Yeah, no, yeah.
And they used to send their CDs with all the lowrider crews that would cruise around the Southwest and distribute those things. That's the time period that I was thinking that you were saying that.
Yeah.
That's a great period.
Oh, so in New Mexico there were these lowrider crews?
Yeah, Moonshine would just load these lowrider crews up with CDs, and they would just roll around the Southwest and distribute these things.
That's the same way Too Short did it. That's the same way Eazy-E did it, man. They just had shit in the trunk of their car, and they'd have these records in the trunk of their car, and I think they'd just play them in their little boom cars, boom, 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 and then people would buy them. I mean, it's just showing up, man. It's just having somebody show up.
I loved that era of acid jazz and trip hop and all the trip hop stuff that was going on in Albuquerque at the time with L.A. Smooth and his hip hop hour, more than an hour.
Oh yeah,
that was some cool stuff.
And I would listen into the KUNM radio show, the hip hop show, and I would just tape it.
Street Beats.
I would tape the whole show. Yeah, Street Beats. Which is still on now. You can still hear Street Beats.
They took it off the air for a while.
Yeah, but it's back.
Good.
And I was actually on Street Beat for that first record. I went on and did a little interview, and that's another thing I learned is that you got to kind of open up in your interviews a little bit, because I just sort of said, like they said, the common thing to say even now in hip hop is where are you representing? Where are you from, right? And they're like, where are you from? Where are you representing? And they're all excited, and I'm like, here. It's just fucking crickets, and they're like, and of course, because I'm not normal for a rapper, I'm a producer too, so they'd be like, who did your beats? And I'm like, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Your 2-syllable answers.
Yeah,
that's really exciting.
I expected them to recognize that I was a fucking genius, right? Because I'm
international superstar. Yeah.
No, but you gotta tell people you're a genius. You gotta fucking make it clear. I'm fucking rad. You better know it. And and I just went back to the sort of cocky hip hop thing, and it's okay. You can have a little swagger, and you can have a little fun with it, you know.
That's funny.
A little humility helps though too.
So where did
rad.
MC Murph come from?
So I dropped that name, and the reason is because it came from in high school. When I got to high school, I was new, and nobody knew me, and I was asking this guy for.
Where were you in high school?
What's that? Oh, so I grew up in Taos, New Mexico, but I went to high school. We moved to Albuquerque, and so I went to a high school called Las Lunas High School. And I got there, and I didn't know anyone, and I was in class, and I needed a pencil. So I asked this guy next to me. His name was Andrew, and he had a big curly afro. He was a white guy, but he had like a Jufro. And I said, "Do you have a pencil?" But I was really mumbly. I was a mumbly kid. So he was like, "What? Murford?" You know how people repeat what they think you're hearing? And I just kept saying it, and he kept going, "Murford?" And I just gave up. And I was like, "Yeah, Murford." And from then on out, I was named Murford at high school. And then that got shortened to Murph. So my name, like there's a whole crew of people, even after high school and into college, that know me as Murph now. And they call me Murph if I see them. And so I just called myself MC Murph, you know. And then later on, I had a discussion I was having a conversation with Mark Smith, who's the inventor of slam poetry, and we just had this conversation about nonsense and about communication and about how the point of poetry is to communicate, and how that name is directly out of not being able to communicate and not being open and mumbling and being insular, and so that doesn't seem to be in keeping with what the goal was. So I dropped it.
So how many records did you do that had the label MC Murph? I mean, that's what you were going on.
I did all of this pre-CD stuff and under that, and then I did 2 CDs under MC Murph, 2 full-length CDs, and then I took a big break from that and was doing the Third Option stuff, which is more of a techno-y thing. So I did two MC Murph CDs and some performances and stuff under the name MC Murph. A lot of slam under the name MC Murph.
Huh. Oh, so you did. By the time you got to Houston, you were still using that. That's right. For the yeah, just barely. And that was sort of the transition. The period in Houston was a really good sort of transitional period where I learned a lot of things, and I dropped that name, and I got coached, and I sort of developed, rather than just being this raw sort of a little bit of talent and cocky and not knowing anything and working in a vacuum. Houston was the first time where I said, okay, I'm working with people now. People are coaching me, and you're going to drop the stupid name. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. You're going to, start to grow. And that helped. I mean, Houston was rad. We rocked it. So how did you get into the poetry slam scene?
Poetry slam scene. So when I was 19, I was working on when I was more like 21, I was almost going to turn 21. I was working for Channel 5 at which is a PBS station in Albuquerque. I was just a sound guy and an intern, and we were working on a documentary about the Albuquerque Poetry Slam team, which consisted of all these badasses. And I was watching the initial footage in the edit bay, and I'd been rapping, and I'd been thinking about, can I get on stage? I started rapping because I was afraid to sing. And then I looked at this poetry slam guy, and he's doing this poem, and it was badass, but I was like, it's just talking. I can do that. I mean, who can't talk? Fuck, he doesn't even have to get rhythm. He doesn't have to sing. There's no music. He's just talking, this idiot. And which, again, the stupid, cocky 20-year-old who doesn't realize that he's watching one of the best in the world do what he does. And so I just assumed I could do that. But that's great. When you're young and you don't know that you suck, you can really do stuff. So the next time we shot the Poetry Slam, I set up my mics and stuff, and then I said, I'm going to enter the slam. So I just jumped up on stage, and I had written this thing. I had memorized this thing called, I don't even know what it was called, but it started off like this. He got AIDS because he's a homo sapiens. And I got really lucky. Because I did that was a summer, and I did like a summer's worth of always doing poetry slam. And it just so happened that the Poetry Slam team the best poets in the city were gone.
I'm
They were
sorry.
not there, right?
Homo sapiens thing.
Right. So it was, it was a poem about this AIDS guy that we did a documentary on. But I was like, and it probably wasn't as bad as I think, but it was bad. But I was winning the slams because
You were
the
winning.
good poets
You started a
weren't
poem.
there.
Your first poem started out like that, and you were.
Actually, it was I got AIDS because I'm a Homo sapiens, right? And it was all this other stuff. But people fucking ate it up. And what I learned is that if you own a stage, people will eat up what you're saying. If you act like you know what you're doing, people will buy it. Now,
Yeah.
but again, I was lucky because the good poets weren't there. They were out of town, right, for the whole summer. So I thought I was really good. Like, I thought I was the fucking best. And I had another poem that was even worse that got immortalized in that documentary. And it was like something about, and then they put on their fear hats and ask you for a quarter. And it's that I cringe on. That is embarrassing. Right there. That was fucking terrible. And then, so I was a slam poet, and then I actually kind of quit that, and then I met Tamara at work at another job, and she was a slam poet, and I just wanted to get with this girl, and I was all, oh, a girl. And I wanted to impress her, so I started doing the slam again. And I owned the stage, but I couldn't, once the good poets were around, I couldn't win. But then with Tamara's help, and then when, we got together and we moved to Houston, and then there was all this sort of growth work, she helped me try to sort of get to be a better writer, because Tamara's the real deal when it comes to writing. Like,
Yeah.
she's the real deal. She'll go down in history. And so she knew I sucked at writing. She knew I owned the stage. And so she helped me to sort of develop the ability to write. And then at that point, we really started to win slams, and I started to actually be good at it. And that was good. That was cool.
And she was a good slam poet as well.
Oh, she was amazing.
And we're talking about Tamara Nickel
Tamara
here.
Nicholson.
Yeah, Tamara Nickel. Whose name is Tamara Nickel Smith. now.
Nickel Smith, that's right. And we'll put a link to something in the notes on this show.
Yeah.
So you get to Houston. What year is this? Like 2002 or something?
2001, I got to Houston. And that's when we went to Seattle. Houston didn't have a poetry slam team, so we actually sort of went as individuals, me and her, and this other guy named Marcel Murphy, to Seattle in 2001. Marcel's the baddest. And so we went to Seattle. He was just there to observe. We were there as competitors. That's when I did my poem Revolution and got like a 1.4 and nearly wanted to cry. I mean, it was bad. We did not do well in that competition. I don't think Tamara did that well either. She did better than me, though. Another place where we learn that context is decisive, because when you're a member of a team, you have a lot of energy behind you, and then when you're just the individual in that same competition, it can be kind of nobody cares, right? So
You have to have some way of introducing yourself to an audience. Like, you're not just there's there's a whole lot to be said for that.
Well, and we always at the time, and especially before, we always had this sort of ethos about, oh, it's supposed to be how good you are, and it's supposed to be how the art is. And if somebody came in and won the slam simply because they were already popular, it was like we were mad about that. But now what I see is that that's part of the game. And the thing is that, you think you're good because you wrote a good poem, but that's not all there is to it. You think you're good because you made a good song. That's not all there is to it. There's a whole other game. And to tell you the truth, it depends on what the result is that you're seeking. So if you're seeking winning a poetry slam, yeah, you need a good poem. Yeah, you need to be a good performer. Yeah, you need to have good diction. But that's just the beginning. You also need to be working when you get to the venue. You need to be relating to people. You need to be nice to people. You need to connect with people. You need to open yourself up so that once you get on the stage, they already want to hear what you have to say, right? It's the same thing if you're an artist and you're a musician or somebody, you want to make money. Well, that means you need to have friends and you need to connect with people. And so just saying that I'm super talented and then going and being a dickhead all the time, you won't succeed. And that's called not being good at it.
That's true. That's but actually we just talked about this in the I Hate Art section that Troy was saying. you can be talented or you can be good to work with. You only need one of those, right?
Yeah,
one of those,
exactly.
you don't have to be talented at all, really.
No, you don't need that. And that's why, people who are talented get pissed off. And I was always pissed off because I've been nobody for a long time and I've known that I had talent. I mean, I may have been full of shit about how good I actually was at it, but I wasn't wrong about the talent. But then I'm pissed off because I'm nobody. Well, there's something more to learn, and you guys are actually some of the people who first started teaching me that. Like Larry and me had a conversation probably 15 years ago about the Matrix or something, and talking about how they were new, and I was theorizing that they just went to the studios and were like, fuck you, we can do it. And Larry was like, probably not. They were probably nice and they probably related well, and because people don't like it when you say fuck you. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe so. And then Troy taught me something else about success and money, and I quote this all the time now. He told me a story about when he was in college and everybody but him was struggling because all of the other artists had this some weird sense of integrity where if they had this big old painting and a company came on, they wanted to pay him $300 for this little corner, then they would say, no, you have to have the whole painting. It's my artistic integrity. And they would not make money. But Troy was like, sure, I'll take $300. Use whatever corner you want. I don't care.
Right.
And so that has stuck with me like as a lesson. Like, again, there's a game to be played, right? You're playing a game. There's a result you're trying to get, and the mistake is thinking that the only thing you have to be good at is making a song or singing or whatever. When in reality, it's a big game, and that's actually really cool to me. I'm like so excited because there's this whole bunch of shit that you can learn and try to be good at.
Yeah, it's the difference between the lottery ticket and the installment plan, right? Like I'm just swinging for the fences every time I get up there, or I'm just gonna make contact. Like I'm gonna put myself in play. If I make $20, that's better than nothing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like that's the thing that when people talk about whether you can become a rock star, and the conversation amongst the squares is always no, you can't, right? It's lottery odds. And blah, 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 blah. And you get really discouraged because people think that it's just about luck. And sure, if you have some luck, that's a really good thing. But it's not about luck. They have a saying, it takes 20 years to make an overnight sensation. And it's really true. Even fucking Britney Spears took 20 years, or well, really like 17 years to become what she was when she was the most famous. And it's just, you put in work. The illusion is that it explodes and that it's a sudden boom. And that's the illusion, and we make that illusion on purpose in the industry, especially in the music industry. But that's not actually how it works. How it works is you ongoingly, day to day, come to work and do your job like everyone else in the world. Not like a drunk. You don't go to work at 10 p.m. and try to make it as a rock star by being drunk and talented. I did that. I did that for 4 years, and yeah, I was badass, but I was sick and dying and poor and drunk and talented and not good.
So speaking of sick, it was somewhere after this time period, so you end up back in Albuquerque. You've done the slam period, you sort of, you ended up back in Albuquerque, and then you got sick, really sick. So you talk about that period?
Yeah, I came back to Albuquerque, and then I went to Austin, and then I came back to Albuquerque again, and I was slowly kind of slipping, and I didn't really notice, but it was kind of hard. And then in the summer or the fall of 2012, like November, my lungs just tanked. And this is common for cystic fibrosis. There's a downhill slide for a while, and then you're fine, but then it just tanks. Maybe you get pneumonia or something. And I remember being at a show. I was doing a show with a trio. I was singing and I'm rapping and stuff at this little coffee shop in Albuquerque. And we had a pretty good set going, but I couldn't breathe. I mean, literally couldn't breathe. I remember I had to stop a song. I was good at that point at being magnanimous and engaged, so I made it a joke and everyone had fun and the show was successful. But I could not freaking breathe, like literally. And that was like November, and then December it was worse. And then I ended up sort of bringing oxygen home all the time. And by February, it was bad enough that my mom took me to the emergency room. And after that point, it was, 6 months of being in and out of the hospital and basically an invalid. I couldn't do anything. So the music business stopped. It was fucked up. But, it actually turned out to be the best thing in the world because, I did all this work. I had to work really hard to even get referred to get a double lung transplant because I was really non-compliant before that, and I was sort of outside the system, and they don't just give you lungs. You have to
Really?
prove that you're going to take your right. That's another little lesson if you're young. You might want to take care of
They
your
just
body
don't give
'cause
you
they
lungs, kids.
Yeah, they don't just give you kidneys. They want to make sure you're going to take your meds. You're going to take care. This is millions of dollars they're going to spend on you, and somebody has to die, and another person has to not get those lungs. So I had to do a lot of work, and I had to change immensely. I had to change from that loosey-goosey, flaky, I'm super talented, fuck you everybody thing. I had to get my hair cut, and I had to turn into that sort of more like discipline. I had to change from Jackie Chan to Jet Li. I had to change into the discipline type who could take care of business and show up. And then I got referred to be a lung transplant candidate. And then I went to Stanford, did a bunch of testing, and then, which was insane. The most pain you will ever feel probably is if you get an ABG test, which is an arterial blood test, where they go into your wrist, deep into your wrist and poke and get an arterial blood sample. Oh God, that's so much pain. So I did all of that for like 6 months. I did those. I did all this testing at Stanford, and then they listed me on July 3rd of 2013, and then for some reason I got a call on July 4th, 2013 that said we have lungs for you, and that's unheard of. I was like this miracle.
So
It was
this
the best thing that ever happened to me.
what was the cause of that? Was it just that there weren't any other recipients that were like the same size, or?
Well, the way the transplant list works is you do a bunch of testing and evaluation, and you get a number. And the number is between 1 and 100. And 1 means you're very, very sick. 1 probably means you're already dead. 100 means you don't need a transplant right now. So most people who get transplants are somewhere in the middle, somewhere around 40 is their number. Your number determines something about your ranking as well as the sort of order that you came in. So, people were there before me, so they were ahead of me on the list. And so it just turned out that there were 2 or 3 people in the area that were ahead of me, but the lungs were too big for them. And I was just a little bigger than those kids, and I got the lungs. So, yeah, it was like, and I remember what was really freaky about it is that for a couple of weeks beforehand, or maybe even a month beforehand, I would do this sort of mantra every night. I would do this mantra: I am strong, I am happy, I am healthy, I am free. Because they kind of somebody taught me to do mantras. I think it was my mom. And I said, well, if I don't already believe something, what the hell good is a mantra going to do? And she said, that's the point, is that you don't believe it, and you say it, and your subconscious starts to believe what you say over and over again, whether or not you already believe it. So that's a case for watching what you talk about a little bit. So I said that over and over and over again. It became a song later: strong, happy, healthy, free. Look it up. And then the other thing I did while I did that is I pictured, because I just didn't want to wait on the list for 3 months or 6 months. I didn't know if I would make it, and I had to live in California, and we couldn't afford it. So I kept envisioning that exact scenario. I just kept picturing this scenario where they called and said we already had lungs, and I would picture every bit of it, like how my dad would react and how I would feel. And it was the freakiest thing, because July 4th, I'm eating breakfast at 9 a.m., and I get this call, and they're like, we already have lungs for you. I'm like, whoa, this is exactly what I pictured. And it was freaky.
So I hate to back up in this story some, but you mentioned Stanford, and I sort of skipped that point. So how'd you end up at Stanford for a master's?
Well, you did that,
I know.
bro. Thanks. I know. So what happened was we were working. I was in Houston working in the studio. I had all these sort of tape machines that were hard disk tape machines, and it was a bit limited. And I was talking to you about trying to get a Pro Tools system, which at the time was really like a $50,000 proposition. It was just incredibly out of reach. But you said, there's this thing called Linux, and Linux is open source, which means it's free, which means you can build a computer and make this Linux operating system, and then there's all this Linux audio software because there's this whole movement, and you should learn it. And I said, well, all right. So I got all these parts for a computer, and I built a computer, and I learned Linux, and I learned Linux audio, and I just went wholeheartedly into it, and I ended up being the first person in the world to use this particular Hammerfall audio sound card in Linux. And the way I did that was via a lot of forums and your help, and I was constantly interacting with this guy, Fernando, who happened to be on staff in this department at Stanford called the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, whose focus is not on Linux, but they happen to use a lot of Linux boxes, and he's like really big in that community online. So I got to know him, and then I got to sort of know about that program, which is the program that invented synthesis. It's the program, one of our adjunct professors was Max Matthews, who worked at Bell Labs and invented digital audio.
Huh.
If you hear this, the little song in 2001 where it's like, Daisy, Daisy, that song, that's completely computer generated, and he did that. So that was one of our professors. So I just learned about that program, and I applied to it. And then I moved to Oakland before I knew that I was accepted, because my friend Dustin was there, and we were going to sort of do our nquit music record label. And then I actually didn't think I'd get accepted because I had a 2.7 college GPA. But I got accepted. And I think it was partly because of the essay that I wrote, and partly because I had a history. By then it was already 10 years or more into me being in the record business, and I had, a couple CDs out. I had all the stage experience from slam poetry. I had something like 12 releases from the Third Option Act, which is that sort of techno poetry fusion thing. So I had all of this stuff out. And so I think that's why they said
it gave them a sort of an alternative to their regular alumni, which is really technical staff. Like that's
yeah. In fact, there was 12 people in my class, master's class. 3 of us were musicians. I was the only one focused at the time on content creation. The others were doing, one guy was inventing interfaces, and another guy was doing biometrics and shit. And everyone else was computer science, people who had computer science masters already or electrical engineering masters. And they were all, from other places. There was a guy from Finland, and there was a guy from, or was it Sweden? No, it was probably Norway. I don't know. It was Scandinavian. And there was a bunch of South Korean guys and some Chinese guys. And so I was really the only one that was focused on content creation, and that was focused on sort of the idea of the business side of art and music, and not research, really.
Huh. So yeah, that the reason I thought of that was that's the reason you decided to have your transplant at Stanford, right? Went back out that way.
Yeah, that was part of it. The other option was Houston, and of course I have friends and family in Houston, so I was thinking Houston at first, actually. But because I went to school there, and also because the track record of Stanford is the best in the world when it comes to transplants, and the relationship between Stanford and the University of New Mexico is really good. And that was, it was really a matter of when you decide where to get a transplant, it's actually a matter of deciding where to apply, because you want to maximize your chance of getting accepted. It's not like college where you can apply to a bunch of places. If one place denies you, your chances of getting accepted somewhere else are drastically reduced. So I needed to really think hard about where I was likely to get accepted.
Oh, creating relationships. That same successful idea.
Yeah.
So after that, to me, you had a miraculous recovery, and then you got right back into recording some stuff, and it seemed with a different type of focus.
Yeah, completely different focus. And I mentioned this before, like before the transplant, my stuff was either really dark and sad or angry. Some of it was decently sort of, upbeat, but it was angry. And even my poetry slam stuff was decently dark. There was one poem that was a love poem that was definitely my most popular poem that didn't come from a place of anger. And, after the transplant, I just there was a couple of things. First of all, I was happier. And second of all, I could breathe better. And there was this specter that was now no longer looming over me. When you have the specter of death on you all the time, it's a dark way of being. And after that, it was like this whole new world. It was like, God damn, this is awesome. I'm fucking happy.
And I bring this up a lot when I'm talking about you or to you, but like you being your age, which is what, we're 43 now,
42 now.
42. So your age in cystic fibrosis and the technology that developed along with cystic, if you were born today, somebody said you had cystic fibrosis, they'd be like, well, you probably make it, to your 50s, and we'll see what happens, as things are going. But that's, your prognosis is pretty good. But when you were 8 and you got a cystic fibrosis diagnosis, there's very little technology. It was like, there are people that live to their 20s now. Like that was the...
Yeah. The first lung transplant, I think, was done in something like 85. So that was when I was 10 years old. When I was 8, and throughout the time, the life expectancy was under 20. It was like you're going to make it to 19. And that's where I got the sort of defiant manner that I'm still really defiant. I mean, I don't like authority. I don't do punk music, but I'm very punk in my attitudes. I'm really defiant. And that's why. Because they said, you're going to die. And I thought, well, as an 8-year-old, you don't get that it's a disease that's telling you you're going to die. You think it's the person that's telling you that wants that to happen. So I was like, fuck you, right? So, yeah, it was like age 20. And an interesting thing, that's why I sort of left I did really well. I was an athlete, and my parents were really smart. They made me run and everything. So I actually was doing really well. And I left the clinic system at 18 years old, and I spent 13 years without even touching. I didn't even have a blood test in that time. I just got the one med that I needed. And it was interesting because when I went to Stanford and I did the psych eval. There's a psych eval as part of the evaluation. And the lady asked me, so how did you feel growing up knowing that a lung transplant was pretty much inevitable? And I said, I didn't grow up knowing that. Nobody ever told me anything about a lung transplant until 2 months ago. What I grew up knowing is that death was inevitable. So this lung transplant thing is awesome. I mean, I'll take it. She was a little surprised.
So if that was kind of the motivation of themes in the past, what themes are you pursuing now?
Well, that's a good question because sometimes I don't know. But, one of the things that I do now is, first of all, the other thing that happened after the transplant, and this was happening before, is I started getting more serious about business. I started, I got to, whatever age I was when Iggy was born. Iggy's Larry's son, for all you listeners. Iggy's 14. He was born, and, that was the beginning of all my friends starting to have kids. And like, I didn't have kids, and I didn't have kids partly because I knew I couldn't afford it. Because I was just this slam poet. I mean, I was kind of well known and I was all over the world, but I couldn't support a child or a family or a house. So I started thinking about, you need to think about business. And after the transplant, I got really serious about that. So now I kind of take my inspiration, a little bit at least, from what's needed. So, for example, I have a big list right behind my screen in my studio that just has a list of sync-friendly themes for lyrics. It's stuff that licensing people, that people doing commercials or TV or movies are looking for, that they're always looking for, that they need. So I'll go to that list and, I don't like to be inauthentic. I can't just make it up. So I go to the list and I look, is there something that I'm feeling on that list? And a lot of times right now, it's still like, one of the topics is I'm a fighter. I'm reading it right now. Independence, be yourself, not one of the crowd, inspiration. So let's go, don't stop. And actually, I'm just about to release a song called Don't Stop. So the themes are still kind of the same. And they're kind of the same as what I used to always be about, but didn't necessarily show up in the music as much. And so, my main sort of focus in life is that anything is possible. Don't quit, right? So my label is nquit Records, nquit Music now, and that stands for never, never quit. So, that's still my ethos. That's the one thing that didn't change after the transplant, it just got stronger, is that don't tell me that I can't, and I'm not going to quit on it, right? So almost all the stuff has that in some way or shape or form.
That's awesome. So what are you working on right now? I mean, you just said never stop. Don't stop.
I never stop. Right now, I'm focused right now, and this is maybe 3 months old, of doing monthly releases of new songs, and I'm really getting into music video, as you know, because I'm always back channeling you about it. So I just released a music video 2 months ago called "Happy Every Day," and that was a song that came from a conversation with our friend Sebastian, who I asked him how he was doing, and he was like, "Great, man, I'm happy every day." And I said, "I'm going to write a song about that." So I did, and it's a song, and it's a video now. And then I did, after that, I did a song and a video called "Woo," with an exclamation point, "Woo!" And it's called "Woo," and it says a brand new day, and that's the video that's out right now. And then there's a video that I'm editing right now called "Don't Stop," and it's a new song with a guy called Javier Silva, who's a member of this group called 10 Somersets, which is actually, I think, his solo act. He's an insane producer, and he produced that record, "Don't Stop," and that's what I'm working on. And then the next thing, next week I actually go for my transplant checkup at Stanford for my annual checkup, and so when I'm there, I'm going to shoot a video for a song called "Somewhere," which is on my last record, "Living is Bling," and it's a sad love song. It's sort of like a "I Wish You Were Here" song, and people like it. I cringe at it a little because I just don't like my performance on it, if I'm honest. But people have given good feedback, and I think it's a pretty song. So I'm gonna go do a video while I'm at Stanford in the studios and in the grounds there.
That's awesome. So what are you listening to?
A lot of what I'm listening to these days is anything that's been licensed. So I'm really, that's business wise, that's my main focus. So I do a lot of research on licensing. And so, that's a wide variety. So it might be, what I've heard, like the other day I was listening to an MTV playlist, and it was a lot of kind of dubstep hip hop fusion. So, and then you're rapping, and then a lot of swagger. So I've been listening to that a lot and kind of digging that. And then the other thing that happens, you hear a lot of, is singer-songwriter stuff. And I like, I think it's Imagine Dragons that does that song. You're going to have to look it up, but it's badass. I like it.
So, the top 3 albums of all time.
Of all time, that's really hard, but I have to put Stone Cold Rhymin' on that because of the Young MCs taught me how to rap. The Roots, I don't know what album. Actually, I would put any of the Roots albums in that list. I love the Roots, and the Rage Against the Machine album, the famous one with all the famous songs that they did. That's my favorite. Oh, and let me just
Evil Empire?
White Zombie.
Evil Empire?
Yeah, Evil Empire. The first one with the burning guy on the front of it, and it has bulls on parade and all that, and the killing in the name of "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me." That was revolutionary to me. And then White Zombie, the first Los Exorcisto.
That wasn't their
album.
first, but that was the first big one, yeah.
That was the first good one.
Yeah. No. You're right.
That's another.
We found out we were at that same show together.
Yeah, we were, and that's another band that has
Wasn't
that same
I at
thing.
that show too?
Well, they played twice, so I don't know. You probably were. They played twice Albuquerque with that same album. So
Okay.
It was sick, and that they had this interview. Rob Zombie had this interview that I read where he was talking about their first record,
Yeah.
which they did for $500, and they just had to mix it on the fly and record it live, basically. And he hated it. He said it sounded like accordions, and it was just terrible.
Oh, yeah, it was bad.
He still has all of them. He has 400 copies of this shit
Yeah.
in his bedroom because he can't, so, that's how it works.
yeah, La Sexta Cristo Devil Music Volume 1 was awesome.
Yeah.
That's the best. Oh, I love that record.
So, where can people find you? And I want you to list everything because you've got a bunch of online presence and otherwise that you should list now.
Okay, well, you can find me at aarontrumm.com, AARONTRUMM, that's M like Mary.com. You can find me on Facebook at Aaron J. Trumm. You can find me on Twitter at Aaron J. Trumm. You can find me on Instagram, and you can find me on Reverb Nation and SoundCloud, Aaron J. Trumm. On SoundCloud, you have to put Aaron-J-Trumm, because that's how SoundCloud works. But basically, if you Google Aaron J. Trumm, you're going to find me.
That's cool. And you have a Patreon, too.
Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, I have a brand new Patreon. I could really use some patrons because it's so new. It's Patreon/Aaron J. Trumm. Pretty easy. Patreon.com/Aaron J. Trumm. Yeah, that's going to be my sort of platform going forward.
Yeah. That's going to work. We're gonna get you some patrons.
It's going to work.
Pow! Woo!
Pow! Man, this has been a really good interview. It's been good talking to you. Yeah,
Awesome stuff.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. See ya. That was a really good interview. There's a lot to. It's sort of an interesting thing because you're more compelled by Aaron when you connect this story to it. Like in there, and he's
totally. I've never heard his CF story and the lung transplant. And even though I knew how it ended, I was like, oh, "Holy shit, what's going to happen?"
Yeah.
Well, what's next? And so that was really good. What were you saying?
Well, what he was saying was that the first slam that they went to in Seattle. Like, by the time I had first seen him do slam, I was like, what the fuck? Like, I mean, really, when you see somebody that does slam really well, and honestly, there's some people that do slam really well that are not compelling to me. Like, you go watch them, and you're like, so what? They're on the stage making a lot of noise.
Sure.
And Aaron and Tamara, for that matter, they get on the stage, and by the time they had done all this coaching with each other, which I was not there for, I didn't see any of it. I knew them and they were in town, but like he said, we were having a baby. So, the baby was like a priority in your life. That's all that happens.
Right.
Even if you're not there, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So I didn't see all the coaching. It was just, all of a sudden, 2 years had passed, and then I end up at, the Mausoleum or, some other place where they're doing slam, and they get up on stage, and the whole place goes quiet as soon as they start talking, right?
Right.
So, the idea that he went to Seattle with Tamara and Marcel
And just bricked.
right? Like that's like totally outside of my perception of where they were at the time. But the other part too is then he comes along and he says, then we realized that we had to be part of a team and we had to be presented, and then when we went to those slams, we had to know people in the audience, we had to introduce ourselves and make connections. Mm-hmm. But it's also the same with his music, right? Like I have more of a connection with his music the same way if I know the story, and I do know the story. So like there's something more compelling about his art if you know more of the story and you have a connection. That's it. Anyway, it's really it's a lesson along the way for somebody that I've known a really long time to know all that, and to know when I first met him. He was worse than me when I was 20. Like he really couldn't hold a conversation in a group of people, and I was bad.
For somebody who never talks, Larry.
Yeah.
There was some really whatever. I lost my train of thought.
Okay. What struck you in this conversation?
Well. The connections that we think that we don't have to make, and all of these projects, whether you're soloing it in or coming in with a group of people, all of these projects just take a huge monumental effort, and I'm surprised any of them ever work. But just the sheer will to kind of push things through, whether it's through beginning in ignorance and then finding out along the way, kind of buffet style. You pick and choose what you get, and then you pick and choose what you want, and then you end up learning so many lessons from that. Or
or things that you just didn't want to do.
Right, totally, and or the concerted effort to like try to make these things happen as a group of people. These are all kind of interesting lessons and wisdom, I think, to try to move forward with that kind of information. I don't know if I have a complete, conclusive thought on how all of that is done.
Oh, I don't have a good picture on how any of it works, because I don't feel like I've really followed through on a lot of stuff. But the things that I have followed through on were surprising. Like the things that I put an effort into, and I was like, this is a good idea, and I knew it was a good idea, and then I get it to the point where I present it, and I go, nobody cares about this.
Right.
And then the ones where I was like, I don't know, this is probably a terrible idea, but I'm going to finish it anyway.
Right.
And then people are like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, finished projects are really, really important, no matter what they look like in the end. But I feel like in life, I kind of have completely, my hindsight is like, definitely 20/20 or better, is that, in the moment, I just kind of, I'm in the moment. But if people ask me how you're doing, it's like, I don't know. Ask me in a year, I'll have a better perspective on what was going on in a year, like what I was doing and the mistakes I was making, and then just try to move the ball forward. It's always like a year. Anything that I do or that I'm involved in seems to, a year later, people seem to catch it. Like, oh, that's what you were doing. It's like, that's a year old.
That makes me think of things too, like maybe it is a year old. Like I in some of the podcasts that I've been following, like they sort of catch up a year later, right? And I wonder if they feel the same way, but they just go, okay, well, this is catching, so I'm just going to keep going.
I think we should do it for a year.
Yeah.
And then see where it goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not just talking about podcasts,
Yeah,
but
no.
that was an
Anything.
example.
Yeah, anything.
Yeah.
Anything new and current with artwork for me, usually it takes a year plus for people to catch it. Like nothing that people are seeing right now is current work. Like I just sat down 6 months ago and just did it. It's always some of the stuff that I'm showing now is like 15 years old.
Well, that's funny too, because I mean, how much stuff are you not showing?
Right. A lot.
A lot more than you are.
Yeah.
Like you know, your own editing process gets you.
Yeah.
You go. Oh, I've got 20 pieces in this show.
Yeah.
And but you've got thousands that are not.
Right. That's that own worst critic.
Yeah.
Stonewalling along the way. It really goes through a filter for me, like several layers of filter until it's distilled to something that I like. Well, that's great.
That's awesome. So that's the end of this episode. We interviewed Aaron Trumm. We did some talking about what were we talking about? I don't remember. Doesn't matter. But
all of that.
I don't know who's next. We're going to have somebody on the agenda for next week. But this was a really good one, and it was. Thank you for tuning in.
I'm gonna walk my dog.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Twisted Podcast. For show notes, go to twistedpop.com/twistedpodcast. Merchandise at bigmyth.com. That's BIG-MITH.com. In association with nquit.com. Until next time, this is the Twisted Podcast.